All right, welcome everybody to the Week in Review. We are back in the studio. As you can see, a very special guest. This is Newberry. This is our executive editor, Liz Farrell's dog. He's joining us today in the studio as we're going to cover a ton of information. We've got Murdoch murders updates out the wazoo. We've got some voyeurism out of Aiken, South Carolina, a case that we went over to the Aiken County Detention Center to cover this week. A lot of updates on that case. We're going to go back to the upstate to review a scandal involving a local solicitor, and a lot of stuff on the Thornblade saga. You thought we forgot about that, but guess what? We haven't. All that and much more is coming your way on the Week in Review. All right, so last week was obviously an adventure as we were up in Greenville. This week looks like it could be an adventure too, as it is Bring Your Dog to Work Day. There we go. But our first segment today, we're going to go back to the Murdochs. And it was a big week, obviously, last week with the bond hearing for Alec Murdoch and the discussion over the gag order, the speedy trial. There's a lot of stuff that happened. We're going to talk about that, but also we're going to talk about an incredible report that Liz Farrell filed in the case of Hakeem Pinkney. And folks, if you haven't read Liz's story on the anatomy of this scandal, it is the most comprehensive story that anyone has written. The dog is literally on my foot right now. I love you, Newberry, but you're eating my shoe, bud. Anyway, Liz's report on the Hakeem Pinkney story, by far and away the most comprehensive report that anyone has written on any facet of this case. And in fact, I've been telling people, the prosecutors in this case, their job is done. Literally, they have to print this story, 12 copies, hand it to the jury, done. It's done. It's the most sensational piece of journalism I've ever seen that we've published. And Liz,
thank you.
Seriously, I know I'm blowing up your skirt here, but
no, thank you too. I wanted to thank you because I was thinking about this, and there's no other news agency in the state that would allow for a report like that, because obviously something like that takes time, it takes effort, it takes resources. So it's a lot of investigation and going over the documents again and again as your perspective changes, because you're learning more about the case. So I'm just grateful that this is something that we believe in, and obviously the support of our subscribers and our viewers has contributed to that. So we're able to actually produce something that's useful and informative.
Well, it paid off in a huge way. And by the way, if you're listening in the background, twice a week we have editorial board meetings. And the joke is that we can't really have them unless Newberry's in the background, either snoring or, as he is now, chewing on a bone.
Yeah.
So
sorry, a very noisy dog.
You're getting the full FITSNews experience here, because we literally can't do the meetings without Newberry, right?
No, we can't.
But before we get into Hakeem, and I want you to go through this whole saga, but before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about that bond hearing, particularly about the gag order that was requested, because it seems that that's been driving a lot of the discussion. First of all, what are your thoughts on the gag order? Should Judge Newman agree with defense attorneys and prosecutors and impose a gag order here?
Of course, I'm going to say no. Though I understand why the prosecution would want that. I certainly understand why the defense would want that. I think in this case, though, because it's so much bigger, and again, I will say this: it is not Creighton Waters' job to be the representative for the entire system, and even though the prosecutor, his job is to prosecute that case. So understanding the limits of what he's doing. But we all know that, this is a huge case. It means so much more than just the thing we're looking at. So I have a couple of thoughts. One, I think that the defense, by doing that, obviously is keeping the details in, which I think can be confusing for the families involved, because you didn't see any victims at the hearing. And I can't obviously say this factually, but I almost wondered if it's because we don't know who is considered a victim at this point, because we don't know where their alliance is, or whether they're sticking by Alec's side, or whether they're just confused and they don't know yet. Because and what will help them know would be the information such as the motive. I think that's basically right. I think we should know a motive of anything. So I can understand the sealing, but anytime I hear a judge considering sealing Mm-mm.
He's weighing in on
Yeah.
this.
Anytime you hear that, I start to cringe as a journalist just because I think that there's been so much misuse in this state, using sealing, especially like divorce cases, I understand, but still, like it's misused a lot, and judges are supposed to explain
Come here,
themselves.
Newberry.
Come on up here. Come on.
Come on,
Come
bud.
on.
He doesn't agree with you.
I know, he's so mad.
But let me ask you this question. Judge Newman obviously hasn't issued the
Yeah, we
ruling
got to do
yet.
something about him. Hold on. Ugh, I can't believe this. It's like a baby. Come here.
All right, so we had to throw Newberry out for this segment because this is where we're going to go deep into the Hakeem Pinkney story. Liz, just walk us through it's the anatomy of the scandal, but tell us the anatomy of the story. How did you come up with this concept? Obviously took a lot of time, a lot of research. Tell us about the work that you did on this story.
So the Hakeem story is a complex story within a big ball of yarn of complex stories. And I think when we hear, especially as we're moving into like the litigation phase of this or the adjudication phase, Russell with his hearing, with his new federal indictments, it's important to understand what they might have done. It's like we can hear, okay, money laundering, conspiracy, bank fraud, wire fraud. We can hear that they took, allegedly millions of dollars, but to see it play out, I think was important for people because, especially in the community, I think there's sort of still this idea that, I guess if you believe like Russell's point would probably be that he was taken advantage of by Alec. I know in the courtroom, his attorney said, he doesn't believe that he committed a crime, that he admits to doing these things, but he, says there's a lot of inaccuracies in terms of, did he have the probate judge her permission? Did he not? So those kinds of things. But I think with the Hakeem story for me, there are a couple of things. One, there's so many documents in this case, and sort of having to piece them together and figure out how, if you read the federal indictment, you'll see that there's several cases that are sort of intertwined. So you have to look at all the like archival material related to each of those cases, and you start to see how they overlap. So that's part of it. And then there's a lot of conversations. And I would say one of the bigger things is learning more about probate court and how that works, because I think probate court is so important to understand for the average citizen. Every one of us is going to die at some point, and at some point, our estates will go through probate, whether our estates are $1 or several $1,000,000. So to understand that and to understand the abuses of conservatorships and personal representatives that can occur. So the most famous one would be Britney Spears. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. So I think for the biggest thing for me was, one, I wanted to make sure because this is so complex, I wanted to walk the reader through it and then be able to let the reader go and know that the reader would finish the story. So that was the most important thing. So one, Hakeem Pinkney was a quadriplegic. He was made a quadriplegic through a very horrible accident that happened in Hampton County in 2009. And for 2 years, he lived in a nursing home in North Augusta, South Carolina. So that's in Aiken County. That's about 2 hours from his family's home. So he died on October 11, 2011. And that was 4 days after his case settled. Now, through background reporting, it seems like, from what I understand, that case was settled rather quickly. It went from their mediation had failed. They were going to go to trial. That was the idea. And all of a sudden, the offer that had been given was accepted. There's a lot of different parties here. I think there were at least 3 different insurance companies. Just 2 days before the settlement, one of the parties in the case, one of the defendants, had filed answers to an amended complaint, meaning that to me showed like this case was very much still active, not something that was on the precipice of what I guess any case is about to be settled, right? And then Hakeem died. So when we originally reported that story, Mandy Matney did that story. the public on social media started to speculate, which I don't blame them because there are so many suspicious deaths or mysterious deaths related to the Murdoch family. How did Hakeem die? What happened there? So I started to pull at that thread, and I saw a few Facebook posts from 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I guess, from Hakeem's friends, and it started to indicate to me this question. This question started popping up for me, like, was Hakeem dead when they settled? Like, what happened here? So it sort of reverse engineered for there. So I started asking more questions. Then it started to lead me down the road of Hakeem's father, who a source had come to me and said, you might want to look into that. So I did. And it turns out that one of the things that first came up was this, and it's a joke that I purposely did not make in the story because I don't think it's funny, but I'm going to say it. It had a Weekend at Bernie's sort of quality to it, which was that the day Hakeem died, according to his death certificate, hours after that, Russell Liffey, who is no longer his conservator at that point, because
Once
Hakeem
he's
said,
dead, that's
you're
it.
dead, it's done. That's the minute you stop, you're no longer conservator. Now, you can probably finish up some business there that you're already doing, but at that point, Hakeem had no money. So he was a $0 by Russell's own accounting, according to the probate files. So he buys a multi-million-dollar policy, an annuity that will provide money monthly, and puts down Hakeem's mother as the beneficiary. Now, that's not evil or bad. Like that, what do you like? Yeah, that makes sense, right? Right. But the problem is because Hakeem's already dead, there's a state law that applies. So he did not have children. He was not married. His next of kin are his mother and his father. And that estate gets split evenly, regardless of whether, the father wasn't in his life, regardless of what, because you don't know. Hakeem was an adult man. He was 21 years old. You don't know what, he would have chosen had he been alive. You just don't. And I should say, it's not that you don't know. The state is not going to decide that. The government is not going to decide that for somebody. That's why the law exists. Instead, they're deciding like 50-50 is the way to go. But because Russell did what he did, they got themselves into a bit of a pickle. So the pickle being that a couple of years later, somehow that side of the family finds out, Hakeem's father, like, whoa, what happened here? He hires an attorney through his brother. Somehow, I do not know how that relationship started. That attorney settles the case. They give power of attorney to Hakeem's father's, so his uncle, his brother. So it was Hakeem's father's brother. And Hakeem's father is in a mental institution. He's been, sick and in and out of hospitals for most of his adult life. So they settle for something like $350,000. Now, you heard me say the word multi-million. So the settlement should have been much bigger than that, or the estate should have been much bigger than that for him. But because Russell had put down the mother, they knew they were going to be in trouble. And had anyone pulled at that thread harder, I think that would have probably shown much more like what we're going through now, finding out more about these financial crimes. So it turned out that, yes, so they they signed this thing saying they'll never sue Russell, that this is over, we're done here, I'll take the 350. I don't think that NDA, like that agreement's probably going to stand. I don't know. But what has to happen now? So the questions that start to come to your mind are like, well, does that mean that Hakeem's mother now has to, well, first of all, starting with, is that policy valid? Like, would that policy still be valid? Because it was an annuity. So with that story, I picked this photo. It's a really good photo of Hakeem. And so many people have emailed me to comment on it, saying it because it's a beautiful photo. You can see how much life he has in that photo. And, his last 2 years of life were not great. And that's what's at the heart of this story. So you have what's called a measuring life. And that's part of the policy. So they're trying to determine Hakeem's 21. His average life expectancy as a quadriplegic would be X. Okay, so we have to plan for this many years. This is how we'll invest it. That's how that works. The other part of that is that Hakeem was worth more alive. So he was going to require years of intensive care, very expensive care. And as such, the insurance company was going to be on the hook for that, right? So, to Alec and Russell, I'll say to Alec, uh, that was a very high valued case. So he was going to get a substantial settlement. From what I understand, what they ended up settling for was substantial. They were trying to go for more than that. But Hakeem was not worth as much dead to them. So, as somebody who dies as a result of injuries received in an accident, it becomes a wrongful death case. The wrongful death case that got filed after he died, it was many, many times less than what they received. It was, not even $1 million from what I understand. So that's because you're compensating the estate for the loss and the loved ones for, I don't know if it's pain and suffering, but whatever it would be called, lost wages, whatever it would be. So they had to get that settlement while he was alive. So was he alive when they got the settlement? That's one question. Then
Was he?
I don't know. So I know that there's a Facebook post on October 9th that said RIP Hakeem. And I know that his friends were commenting that he had. So here's the thing. The wrongful death case that got filed after his death at the hospital doesn't have much information in it. The lawyer in the case was, someone from the former PMPED. And I know that when all of this was going down this year, Representative Justin Bamberg, who represents the Pinckney family, he discovered that they hadn't even done the final filing in the case. This case was settled 7-8 years ago. So, it's just sloppy filing. There's just a lot of sloppiness with this case to begin with. But here's the biggest thing, just to go back to what I learned in this. So when we go back and we're looking at, like, as things move forward, what are the stories that will be put forth by the defense, for Russell Lafitte, for Alec, what have you. Well, when you look at something like this, so a conservator, somebody who's supposed to help manage the finances of a minor or an incapacitated adult, they're supposed to act within the best interest. They are a sworn officer of the court. They are a fiduciary, which, as Chad Westendorf of Palmetto State Bank didn't know, but they have a responsibility to make decisions that are in the best interest of their client. So in this case, Hakeem had no money. His family was waiting on the settlement so that they could bring him home. He wanted to come home. They wanted to get him better care, in-house care, which they couldn't do. So he's in this, nursing home. Somehow his ventilator becomes unplugged. Now the question is, when?
Somehow his ventilator becomes unplugged?
Yeah, somehow. And that's the thing, like, I think with the Murdoch case is that every corner you turn around, you're like, oh, I've seen it all now. And you turn the corner thinking, no monster is going to be around there. But then there's another monster that's like, they sawed his legs, and put him in the coffin with them. Not him, not Hakeem, but another case. With Hakeem, yes, the ventilator became unplugged, which many people have written in to tell us is not a reality, because there's beeping sounds that happen and alerts that go off. I don't know what the setup was there. So, but I will say that the wrongful death suit contains very little information, which is interesting because usually you would want to know the facts surrounding the incident. It might just be that they didn't know at that point, but there's nothing that shows the facts of that circumstance. So when did it occur? Facebook tells me, these Facebook messages basically say his family made the decision to take him off life support on October 11th because somebody said that he had fallen out of bed. I don't know that that's the case. He's a quadriplegic. I'm not sure how you fall out of bed.
Right.
So that said, the thing that I discovered in this case that I think is the thing that I'm walking away with most, not just that it appears like Russell had pretended that Hakeem was alive to get this, policy, and then decided, apparently on his own that Hakeem's mother would be the sole beneficiary, which now creates the situation of how do you extract that? What does this mean for her, her annuity? What does this mean for Hakeem's father? Is that the conservator, as I was saying, is set up to help with finances, right? Value of Hakeem's estate is 0. Now, Russell was also Hakeem's cousin's conservator. She was 15 at the time they settled the case. Zero. She had no money before the settlement, right? The day after he pays himself, according to a federal indictment, $75,000 for managing the money of Hakeem and Natasha, he ends the conservatorship. He puts in to the probate court, claiming that both Hakeem and Natasha had turned 18. Now, Hakeem was 21, Natasha was 15. The reason you might say that somebody's turned 18 is because that's the natural age of ending a conservatorship when it's a minor. Here's the thing. You ended the conservatorship at the juncture that Natasha would require a conservator because she has money now and she's 15 and she's going to need somebody to manage that by your own rationale, by your own becoming her conservator, by you guys telling the probate court in Hampton County that this is what has to happen. We agree to this. This is the best decision for this girl.
But that's when he abandons her.
He abandons her the day she gets money to manage. So how do you work around that as his defense? I don't know. Because to me, that was the moment when I was like, how is he going to be able to say, I was helping. I thought I was helping. How did you think you were helping? You gave yourself $75,000 to manage no money. According to the federal indictments, the money was never deposited in their conservator accounts. He managed no money. Now, in his mind, does he think buying an annuity for Hakeem is managing money? Maybe. We'll see. But ultimately, a story like this is important because it slows it down and it says, here are the facts. And I knew like this is a different type of storytelling form. So I knew I had to do it in a timeline, go slowly. And the other thing is I had to put annotations in, which was a huge decision because annotations is giving people homework and you don't really want to do that when you want them to read your story. So I wanted them to all, this is very nuanced stuff. One piece of information cannot stand on its own in this case. It needs the interlocking pieces in front of it and behind it. So those notations helped, I think, give context to people who don't know the court system, help them understand the significance of, for instance, in South Carolina, your conservatorship, your estate needs to be filed in the residence, like the county where you live, not the county where you used to live, not the county where your conservator lives. So Hakeem lived in Aiken County. And this is going to, I think, we are going to see a lot of movement here. And if we don't, we're going to have to ask questions with the Hampton County Court. So the probate judge, her name is Sheila Odom. She retired recently, even though her term is not up. So I don't know what that's about, and I don't know where it will go. My guess is that Russell, because everyone says he's a good guy, and I think good guys can do bad things, but everyone says he's a good guy. He did file promissory notes. He did write out promissory notes for the loans they were taking out of, the Plyler sisters' accounts, which they replenished with money they allegedly stole from Hakeem and his cousin. But
honor among thieves.
Yeah, right. But he filed these with the probate court, which is quite the stunning thing, right? But there is a statute that says, here's how you can loan yourself money from the conservator account. So what role did the probate court judge play in this, if any? I find it hard to believe that there's not going to be any role. So we'll have to see what happens there. But I'm wondering if we're going to start to see some movement there.
So once again, financial crimes, a suspicious death, and questionable conduct from judges. I mean, is this another pattern?
And sloppiness.
Just
sloppy absolute filing. Utter sloppiness, which showed that, there was not a fear of accountability there, I don't think.
Well, the report you did on this was absolutely incredible. And for those of you watching, if you haven't read it yet, as you mentioned, the timeline of this, you start from the beginning, take us all the way through every single step of this case, every filing. There's links, there's annotations, as you noted. I mean, It is just, like I said, literally, if you're trying this case, you've done their work, Liz.
Thank you.
Just drop this on the desk.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, that's the kind of reporting that we're able to do here, and I think that's important. So it's unlike I think I learned a lot as a storyteller in this too, because usually I go for the narrative. I like to, lead people in through that. And this, I tried to keep as plain as simple, but even just using colors to your advantage just to get people to organize the information. And I
Yeah.
don't know, it's a form of storytelling I'll probably revisit too, especially with this
Well, that
case.
was going to be my next question. You kind of who's next? Which case is next for the Liz Farrell treatment?
Right. Well, I think the probate court is where I'm going to be looking next to see
Mhm.
what's going to happen there. I want to pull at that thread some more. Um, yeah, the Plyler sisters, I want to look into that as well. I think that
Excellent.
there's a lot there that we don't know. And being in the courtroom on Wednesday and meeting Alanya Plyler Spawn,
Mhm.
she is a deputy in Lexington County. Her husband's a deputy in Richland County. And I just felt for her, because you are in this room where this guy that you regarded, I mean, this girl, she's a woman now, but she was 12 years old, I believe, when her mother and brother were killed in a crash, and she and her sister, who was 9, were both injured as well. Russell Lafitte managed their account for a long time, their conservatorship accounts. They lived in Lexington County. They did not live in Hampton County, but all their stuff was filed in Hampton County. Um, I think that case, we just don't know a lot about it, because those are he was taking out of, that was where they were taking the loans. It was out of her younger sisters. But to be in a room with a man that you trusted as a father figure, who presented himself as somebody who was doing the best for these kids, to hear that you've been violated by that person when you've lost so much, and you had, maybe one anchor out there. Yeah, I don't like that. And I think it's sort of realizing these crimes, alleged crimes, were being allegedly committed against children and people of color and incapacitated people. So when you look at the most powerless among us, is who they went for. People who wouldn't know to question, and who, you know, put their trust in Russell, put their trust in Alec, because this is a whole area I don't know anything about, investing money that I never would have had were it not for this terrible accident. That's so you trust the people in your community, and Palmetto State Bank certainly has set itself up that way as a place you can trust. So, yeah, I'm going to look at that, I think.
Well, and there are also people who may not have the ability to follow this trail of deception. I mean, because
Yeah.
again, the report that you filed, all the paperwork, I mean, it's literally, it's a winding narrative where paper, and there's misdirection, there's deception,
Hmm.
it's not easy to follow.
No, it's not. And it's not like you get the you don't get a package with a bow on it with all the documents and here's everything you need. It's
Yeah.
not like that. You're really just, with 3 years of reporting, you're revisiting little bits and pieces that you had from other things,
Mhm.
that you know of that exist, that you FOIA for, and other things that, we get, as we say, obtained by
Yeah.
FITSNews
Well, but
through various ways. But yeah.
I also loved as you were putting the narrative together, so much of it was, someone contacted you here, or there was a social media post here, or there was a
Hmm.
Facebook group there, and you kind of pulled all those things together,
Yeah.
found the documents, and then laid out the whole narrative.
Yeah, it really is like Diary of a Mad Woman prior to that. So
Did
it's
you have like
it
a
was nice
whiteboard or
in
did you
my
have a
head.
okay,
No.
like strings?
People do, I think, but no,
Yeah.
I did not. But it is a lot of, I will say to journalists out there, or to anyone who wants to do this, even just for fun at home, one of my biggest tips, because I'm bad at this, is when you're taking screenshots of things, always take a screenshot when you find something, because it could disappear.
Yeah.
You're taking screenshots, you know that your computer's going to name it automatically. And the lazy among us let that stand, because you're like, I'll go back and rename it. It will be fine. If you then you find yourself 2 months into a story and everything's called screenshot with the time and date that you took it, and you can't, so you have to wade through all that and find, you're like, I know I had something like that. So you have to go refine things, and that's not helpful either.
Well, it's an amazing piece of work. I
Thank
think
you.
the feedback I've gotten on it too, all from people, even
Yeah.
folks who haven't followed this story as
Really.
closely. I mean, they're just like, wow, that was finally someone has laid it out exactly what these people have been doing. Because, like you said, we've all heard about these financial crimes,
Yeah.
we've all heard the numbers, we've all heard the names of these people, but no one has ever tied it all together into a story the way that you did. So, just
Thank you.
Excellent work. And I
Yeah.
think we've got Newberry barking at one of the
Do we?
doors back
Is he?
there. But
Great.
Liz Farrell, just an amazing job.
Thank you.
Amazing
I'm
job.
happy to hear that, and I'm glad we're able to do that work, and we will continue to do it.
Absolutely. Liz Farrell, everybody, our executive editor. We'll be back in just a second with more on the Week in Review. All right, so last week we were obviously on location up in Greenville. I'm looking forward to more on location shots because it generates news, it generates tips, it generates buzz. And so one of the things we found while we were on location shooting up in Greenville, sources reached out to us about a story in the South Carolina 13th Circuit Solicitor's Office up there in Greenville. Very interesting story. It involved a senior assistant prosecutor in that office who was exchanging text messages with a juror. Obviously, huge no-no. And it cost the attorney, Jeff Phillips, his job and has temporarily cost him his law license, which obviously it should. Now, Phillips was not the prosecutor on this particular case. It was a case involving a gentleman from Greenville by the name of Rufus Williams, who was facing a number of different charges: aggravated assault, kidnapping. He was able to plead to some lesser charges, in no small part to the fact that this improper communication between a prosecutor and a juror took place. But again, Phillips, the attorney who was sending the text messages with the juror, he wasn't prosecuting the case, but he's in the same office. And the texts were not as benign as he initially claimed. For example, he told the juror, "Don't feel sorry for the defendant," which is clearly kind of pushing that juror to one side of the equation versus the other. Most damning, he said, "Don't tell the judge about this if you're asked." He essentially instructed the juror, if she was asked about the text, not to reveal anything. And that, to me, that's the real problem. To me, that's the real problem, because that is subverting justice. That is actual subversion of justice. So this story blew up in the mainstream media. We, of course, broke it last weekend, but quickly became a mainstream media story up there in Greenville. But another example of problems with South Carolina's judicial system. Can we trust it? Too often we find out the answer to that question is no. Now, in this case, I do want to point a few things out. The judge in this case did the right thing. He kicked the juror off of the jury, replaced her with an alternate, and to his credit, Solicitor Walt Wilkins, who is in charge of that 13th Circuit up there in Greenville, handled the matter the proper way, immediately launched an internal investigation, and as the results of that investigation became clear, took decisive action and fired Phillips, the prosecutor, who committed this egregious lapse of judgment. So there is an argument to be made here that the system did work. Now, here's the problem. How often does this happen that we don't find out about it? How often does this happen where there's not a source who has that information, who passes it on and allows us to do the story and allows the mainstream media then to follow us and insist on this kind of accountability? Doesn't happen as often as it should, folks. But I will say this. In this case, the right thing happened in that prosecutor's office. The right thing happened in that courtroom. And I'll tell you what, you can count on FITSNews. As long as we're covering the judicial branch of government, you can count on us to continue to push for the right thing to happen in every judicial circuit across this state. All right, so one of the bigger stories we covered this week involved the Aiken County Airbnb voyeurism saga. Now, this is the story of Rhett Riviere, a 68-year-old landowner, a wealthy citizen of Aiken, South Carolina, who owns multiple rental properties. And apparently Riviere, over the last 2 decades, if court documents are to be believed, has been surreptitiously videotaping women, men, some children allegedly, at these properties and using this footage for his own sexual gratification. Now, this is a story our readers are familiar with because Riviere was indicted last year on 2 counts of voyeurism following an investigation by the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division. But that case jumped to a higher energy level this week. As this news outlet exclusively reported, new charges against Riviere were filed this week, 2 new voyeurism charges, and they actually date back to 2001. Now, this is important. The charges that were filed against Riviere last year were charges from May of 2019. These charges go all the way back to April of 2001. Now, FITSNews attended a court hearing in Aiken, a bond hearing for Rhett Riviere, who turned himself into authorities on Thursday. was a very interesting gathering. It was a bond hearing, unlike any I've been to in a while, in which the attorneys were not all in the same room. One of the victim's attorney, Debbie Barbier, was actually in a separate room, apparently to keep the victims away from Mr. Riviere. But in her remarks, Barbier argued for a $10 million bond. She pointed out the fact that this is a multimillionaire, allegedly, obviously has the means to flee the country should he try to do that. But Barbier's bigger point was the breadth of this case and the fact that there are potentially hundreds of victims, because again, we're looking at a time span 2001 to at least 2019. And from what we are told, discovering this case has produced tens of thousands of digital records. Now, are all of those pornographic? Are all of those have nudity or other behavior that people would not want out there? We don't know the answer to that. Again, SLED, the agency investigating, has been very tight-lipped, and Second Circuit Solicitor Bill Weeks, his office offered nothing in the way of detail at the bond hearing for Rhett Riviere. But again, we're told by multiple sources that there are thousands of files associated with this case. And I'd also want to point out, this isn't just a criminal case. This isn't just a case about voyeurism charges against Rhett Riviere. There is a civil case in which Airbnb itself is a defendant. And as I noted in our segment on this earlier in the week, it's going to be a new area of law, because this is, again, another one of those situations where you've got an online behemoth like Airbnb. You think of other new companies that have emerged, Uber, Stripe, all these companies that have taken advantage of the online transition to the online marketplace. Airbnb, obviously one of those companies, made billions of dollars off of that. They are now very much in the crosshairs. And in fact, it was the discovery from the civil case, which we are told directly led to these new criminal charges against Rhett Riviere. And again, as Attorney Barbier noted during the bond hearing this week, potentially hundreds of victims. So this news outlet has been covering Rhett Riviere from his arrest last year, which it was right before the Murdoch murders last June, have continued to cover it this past week, attending that bond hearing. I want you to count on FITSNews not only for the very latest in that criminal case, in the event there are new victims named, but also on that civil case. Because, folks, since this story ran earlier this week, we have already heard from multiple sources who stayed in Aiken at some of these properties asking, are we victims? So there's going to be a lot that is going to be uncovered in this case as it moves forward. But again, count on FITSNews to keep you up to speed on the very latest, the Aiken Airbnb scandal. All right, that's a wrap for this edition of the Week in Review. It's the Newberry edition, and in fact, we were able to get him quiet a little bit with dog treats, and I've got 2 of the dog treats here. I'm actually going to try them if he'll let me. Uh-oh. I don't think he's going to let me.
Let's see.
Okay, which one is this?
It's going to blow his mind.
He's going to be very angry.
He's never
Newberry,
seen a human eat one of his treats.
He's going to make a move on him. He's making a move on him. All right, this is blueberry.
I think
I'm going to try blueberry.
flavor.
Okay, blueberry.
Yeah. Ugh.
It's a little chalky.
He's eating with you now.
It's a little chalky.
It's disgusting.
Not bad. And this is the sweet potato one, right?
That's the sweet potato, I believe.
You could actually snack on these. These are not. This tastes kind of like a goldfish.
Would it be satisfying? It's not satisfying to him. Those are his diet treats.
How many calories are in these?
3 calories.
Okay, I'm gonna try the. He's not gonna let me try this one. I got to give this one to him. Come on up, buddy. Come on up. He's like, no, you ate my treat. All right, I'm gonna try it. Sweet potato.
Oh. Is that better? Worse?
Kind of the same.
Really?
Yeah, I'm a little.
Oh,
Look, are these supposed to
no.
be different, marketed differently based on
Oh, they're
taste?
absolutely marketed differently. I've been had. They knew I wasn't going to try them.
I'll tell you what, these are better tasting than the methamphetamine tacos we had a few weeks ago. Dylan made me eat a taco with crystal meth in it, but fun times.
Seems sus.
You never know what we're going to put in our mouths on the Week in Review. Speaking of
I
that,
thought we weren't going to talk about Nikki Haley.
That was going to be my segue to Thornblade, and Liz Farrell just
Oh,
completely
is that right?
stole it.
Sorry.
You know, I was sweating like a hoe in church when we talked about Nikki Haley last week, and I'm starting to perspire now that you mentioned it, Liz. Thank God I got my South Carolina frat boy fishing shirt on, the slight fabric, or else I would be dripping all over this mic.
Sorry. Make the Thornblade joke, though, because they deserve it.
Porn
So
blade?
speaking of things that you put in your mouth.
My comedic timing has been disturbed. Hey, buddy. But the Newberry episode is drawing to a close, but I did promise I would talk about Thornblade. Buddy. I did promise I would talk about Thornblade, which, as those of you longtime readers of this site know, a scandal up in Greenville, South Carolina, involving a prominent country club, ritzy neighborhood up there, $1 million houses, some prominent members of the upstate community. And the allegations that we heard was that there was a prostitution ring, perhaps, certainly a sex ring involving some of the members of this neighborhood and teenage students, kids at nearby high schools. We did a big report this week, following up on our original reporting from 2 years ago. Not a lot of new information, but what we did find out was that the case was actually brought to the attention of the Office of 13th Circuit Solicitor Walt Wilkins. He did review some of the allegations, and what we've been told is that Wilkins reviewed the allegations and again determined that so far the only thing that's been presented to prosecutors, whether at the federal or the state level, consensual sex. Again, in South Carolina, the age of consent is 16. Now, I don't have a 16-year-old daughter. I got a 13-year-old daughter, and let me tell you, if anybody thinks they're going to have consent there, we're going to have a discussion. In fact, it might be a pretty quick discussion, but nothing illegal at this point at Thornblade, just very creepy.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for catching me up on that, because that's always been a mystery to me.
Well, it's been a mystery to everybody. I mean, we've been hearing from people for months. Like the first most popular question we get is not, did Alec Murdoch do it? It's, what the hell's going on with Thornblade? People love this story. They're dying to know. Good news on the Thornblade front. We have put Jen Wood, our intrepid researcher, on the story. Jen Wood, folks, for those of you who don't know her, she was actually on the show last week. Did a big segment on the Murdoch case. Jen Wood is better than Google. Literally, we don't Google stuff anymore because we have Jen Wood. We text Jen Wood something.
We Jen Wood it.
Yeah, we Jen Wood it.
Yeah, she's amazing. I've never in my life met somebody that I trust the way I trust her in looking for information, because usually you're like, they're not going to look as good as I would, but she looks better.
Oh, she looks better than we do.
Yeah.
Better than Google. I mean, it's unbelievable watching her work. And, I say it all the time, and you could probably say it too. Mm-hmm. Most of the stories I write, she's got the Jen Wood stamp on them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I absolutely had her look at that Hakeem story to make sure I wasn't missing anything.
He's still pissed at me for eating his treats.
Yeah, he didn't like that.
He did not like that at all. We were tight earlier, too.
He definitely wants some more to keep quiet.
They weren't even that tasty. It's like
it's almost like Thornblade in here, because we're blackmailing the dog or I guess we're bribing him. I don't know. I don't know my crimes very well.
Oh, I think you know your crimes very well, Liz Farrell. I think you know your crimes very well. But Jen Wood is on the Thornblade case, folks. And again, we put the email up last week. Dylan, I don't know why you hate it when I do this, when I point to the emails. Research at FITSNews.
You don't know why pointing to your lap upsets Dylan.
That's a good point. Now I've figured it out. Figured it out. Am I zipped today? I walked into the bond hearing yesterday completely unzipped. Oops.
It happens.
That's a nice Thornblade segue too, isn't it?
And Jen found something good about Thornblade, I think.
Well,
we'll have to tease that for later.
It's like I want to make a zipper sound, but to do that, I would actually have to do the zipper. We won't do that. We won't do that. I'm blushing now. Liz Farrell, you made me blush on this outro multiple times. But look for more on Thornblade, folks, because we're starting to dig into this story, and we'll let it go for another number of years, 2 years, really, since the last developments in this case. But we're digging back into this, folks, because it is important. And just because a crime didn't occur doesn't mean that there were,
often it's the cover-up that becomes the crime, right? So that's what I would say.
The cover-up, and also the fact that, again, high school kids clearly involved in activities with adults that, is it illegal? Maybe not, but
it's definitely shocking, and I did not know that humans like that existed. I should know better at my age, but
yeah, we should.
Yeah, disappointing.
And also the fact that it's happening in the heart of the social conservative evangelical upstate.
Surprising, shocking.
Yeah.
They're usually so consistent with their beliefs.
Yeah, social conservatives with closet kink. Who would have guessed, right?
Never would have seen it coming.
But stay on the lookout for more on that. And thanks to Liz Farrell for joining us on the
Thanks
Weekend
for
Review.
having me.
And thanks to Newberry,
I
the
apologize
Newberry
for my dog.
episode.
I know.
Take us out, Newberry. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.